You be the judge. Ladies and gentlemen, we've learned about the future of education, the future of work, and now may I invite our next speaker to take us through the future of law. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing Mr. Kirunda. Thank you.
Robert Kirunda. Robert is a senior partner at Kirunda and YCJ Advocates, the director of Financial Trust Bank, and a lecturer at Makerere University School of Law.
I am very glad that whoever is in charge of that thing stopped it right there. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see if the technology will work with me. You know, I was listening to the previous panel, and they were talking about useless degrees and new skills and workshops and all of that. I don't know if we have the presentation ready. Okay, there we go. Okay, sure. And I realized that you can't really take lawyers to workshops. You still need the lecture theater. You can take them to a court of law to see what happens, but you sort of still need to give them the first principles. So I am here to assert and insist that the law degree is not one of the useless degrees. I know the lawyers in the room said, but seriously, let's talk about 4IR and the law. Where is the world going? And I want to start with first things first. I can never do a presentation without telling a story. So I'll tell you a story from a few days ago. As you all know, we worked very hard to get Sophia to come. I reviewed the agreement for Sophia's coming, and something hit me really hard. How many lawyers are in this room? Just by show of hands. This is the very first paragraph of the agreement if you're going to get Sophia. And this is what hit me. It said I was reviewing an event appearance agreement with respect to the performance services of the robot entitled Sophia. When I went to law school almost 2 decades ago, I never imagined I would review an agreement about a robot. All my years of legal practice, I asked myself, so how do you assess the risk in this agreement? What is the risk that Sophia will catch a cold? I say this to say that 4IR is not coming, 4IR is here. And we talk about these things in the sense that we think the robot will come and replace you and take you away, but the robot will come and ask you questions and force you to ask questions about what you're doing today. And so we must look at the law as well that way. How is technology impacting and disrupting society as we know it today? And by the way, this is also evidence that lawyers are going nowhere. You can make all the robots you want, you still need lawyers. So I thought that, but I cannot tell you the impact of that moment. I fell back in the chair. Some people on the organizing committee were in the room. I fell back and said, this is crazy. How do I teach this in law school? Because I teach at Makerere. Over the last 11 years, I have taught the law, and we've never taught robotics. But the second slide there is something I took from, and I want to acknowledge Mrs. Kandi Wekesa Okoboy. I stole this from a presentation she gave some time back. And this is really my version. Yesterday's MC told us, don't do first, second, third, fourth revolution. This is the transition from the third revolution to the fourth revolution. You can see a restaurant as it looks today and what it will look like tomorrow. In one of those restaurants, you will see something missing. And you will see that on the one hand, you have a waiter, on the other hand, hint, hint, something is missing. But you can go serve yourself, and that's what the future looks like. Should we be optimistic or pessimistic? And I ask that because the question, we're going to come back to that slide, so just have those images in your mind, and let's see what comes next. I will remind you about that slide, I promise. So while we are talking about all this, let's talk about why this subject really matters. I think there are 5 major areas in which the law will be disrupted, and there are opportunities such as reviewing agreements about robots. What are the challenges and the question here really is, what should the law look like? But first, what is law? The law really is nothing more than an expression of a communal sense of morality. What we all agree is what should govern us, is what's going to happen. In some cultures in Africa, it's okay to peck on both sides of the cheek. In other cultures, oh my goodness, what do you mean? In the West, it's okay to wear jeans to work. If you go wear jeans to my office, I will fire you. That's really what the law is. We have a communal sense of morality. We express it and in a command. If you disobey the command, we give you a sanction. And we therefore choose a sovereign to govern us. Whether we are kids on a playfield, I stopped playing soccer because my brother hit me so hard I got injured. I never went back to the pitch. I was in senior 2. He broke the rules of the game. He was sanctioned that day. That really is what the law is. On the other hand, you have the Hammurabi Code. So the image on the bottom of that screen is the Hammurabi Code, which some of you would know. In that society, it was okay to take an eye for an eye. But in between those two generations, the Hammurabi Code and the kids on the playground, you still have a sovereign whom we have agreed on to enforce a constitution. And many of us know the old man in a hat. He needs no introduction. If you think about it that way, the law really is nothing more than the software of society. And you will need a legal framework for a 4IR-powered world. And so the question is, how do we codify the things that unite us, abstract notions such as morality, and what is good for us, and what is the social construct of the future? That's really why we must ask, what does the legal framework of the future look like? Is it really about code and geeks and robots, or is it more than that? The legal field has been changing from the Hammurabi Code until today, and it will continue changing. But the question is, legal fields don't just emerge. New approaches have to be thought through, and legal thinking expresses those very notions that we analyze. So what we must be looking at today is these developments. What is the context in which Jumia is going to deal with these things? You know, when you say, and something that Ronnie said stuck with me, he said the only time for human intervention in their process is when something has gone wrong. That sat with me because actually no one goes to court to celebrate when they do a good deal. The only time you call us to go to court on your behalf is when you're fighting with the people that you were clapping hands with and you know, being happy about. And my presentation has gone dark. There we go. So let's talk about the areas of disruption. I believe that as we are remaking the law, there are 5 areas of disruption. The first is the very nature of the law itself, and now 4IR is not agreeing with me. But because of time, I am going to continue anyway. The first is the nature of law itself. Can we still say the law is a command backed by a sanction enforced by a sovereign? What does that mean when really the structure of the law is coming from algorithms? What does that mean when big data is what is driving decision making? What is the nature of regulation? How do you write a regulatory framework for Cambridge Analytica? You know, Facebook is in San Francisco and dictating how people vote in Kenya. How do you write a legal framework for that? Do you need a statute or do you need a different mechanism? What are the risks? And this is where the ethical questions come in. And we'll touch on that briefly, but also what enforcement mechanisms will make more sense. Can central banks actually regulate Calibra and Libra, the Facebook cryptocurrency that was announced recently? But at the end of the day, is there room for human intervention before things go wrong? In essence, therefore, ethics and humanity are what, in my view, should engender any good legal framework. That's why we've come from the Hammurabi Code to today. Who is the sovereign? If indeed algorithms are really just crunching data, then who is making the law and who is enforcing it? You know, that's a fundamental question. Rights and responsibilities. What is right and what is wrong? Because you see, we have a case in Uganda that many of you would have read about. This has been bothering me for a very long time. Stella Nyanzi. She did things I would never do for reasons that I have never understood. You know, she posted on Facebook things that I would never read out loud. I have never read her post beginning to end because of my own sense of morality. But if you take what she posted on Facebook and post on Twitter, Twitter will censor that content. Why? Because morality is now no longer that which is communal. It is that which the Facebook board or Mark Zuckerberg decide is moral. Can we say, therefore, that we have a good grasp of what our society is going to look like when the technologies finally disrupt us completely? We can talk about education in the context of involving and teaching kids to think independently. But are we still in control of that which is moral in that context? And therefore, can we still write the foundations of the law as we understand them? Is privacy really a human right or is it a product? I raise that question because I think it's time for social media companies to begin paying us for the data we create. These days, when I went to law school, copyright was about you sang a song, you have a copyright, hallelujah. Now, in fact, it makes more sense to release your song on YouTube and AudioMark than it does to release it in a studio and a radio station. Why? Because the data analytics will make sure that you get paid and you get paid properly. Blockchain enables us to distribute the royalties across the entire chain and not just to the artist. So these technologies have their power, and they are creating a new dimension of equity. Are we as lawyers thinking through what that in fact means? Because I think it makes more sense to demonstrate the value eroded by copyright using blockchain than it does to go and argue the principles of sweat of the brow that I learned in law school many years ago. So these technologies are teaching us new ways of thinking about rights and responsibilities, command and sanction, but are we actually writing those in the framework? In fact, the better question is, can we in fact write all of that in the legal framework? What do you include in a law and what don't you? I chose those two examples at the bottom for a very specific reason. Dr. Magara and others who are in health would probably know about Babylon Health. Babylon Health is an AI-powered chatbot that will talk to you about any health condition you have and will diagnose. It's caused a lot of chaos in the UK. But here is the question. Babylon Health has the ability to predict an epidemic instantly. Why? Because if you're sitting in the Serena and there's 10 people saying, oh, I have a stomach upset, there is a likelihood something is wrong with the food at the Serena this particular day. Do they have the obligation, or should they have the obligation to tell the state someone has poisoned people at the Serena? That looks to me like a legal question. Okay, let's talk about the data they have. Over 5 years, they will have a lot of data, and they should be able to predict how society is reacting to different conditions, how genes are mutating, how diseases are evolving. Should we make it an obligation for them to give us that data for purposes of budgeting and planning? We can improve society using these technologies, but should we make these things mandatory? Because actually, they own the data. Facebook has just announced that they want to do this thing they call a cryptocurrency, which I think is not really a cryptocurrency per se, more than it is a payment system. But think about the data implications there. In fact, the US Senate has just, some two members have brought a bill to Senate, which I'll talk about briefly. But if you think about these things in that context, you can predict an epidemic, but also if you have, you know, the other side of acts of God is acts of evil men. If you have acts of evil men, then you can use AI to actually cause a genocide. What is the legal framework on that? Is that terrorism? Is that, you know, so all these are questions that are being introduced. So I want to emphasize that you will not get rid of lawyers because someone has to think through these things. And it gives me so much joy to be able to say that. You know, but the lawyers in this room, are you thinking about these questions, and will you be able to answer them as the years go by? Now, let's talk about regulation. And again, there we go. There we go. Let's talk about regulation. What do you include in a regulatory framework? Can you predict all the scenarios? Because I think that in the last 1 year of engaging in the blockchain space, the conversations are changing. ICOs were such a hot thing 1.5 years ago. I think that that's sort of going down now. Why? Because the tech is evolving, and as technology matures, considerations change. Now, stablecoins are in vogue. I think I'm hearing more about stablecoins than before. Institutional versus product-based regulation. If you're a regulator, the central bank, the Capital Markets Authority, do you regulate the bank or do you regulate the product? Do you come and say, if you are going to use big data to make lending decisions, then we will make sure your lending decisions are not biased against women? A chat I had last evening with Philip really just made the point for me. One bank was looking at data and they said, but women are disadvantaged because the data is running through an algorithm. Should that be a legal issue? Should it be a social issue? But why, if I'm a private businessman that only cares about profit, do I care about women and their borrowing habits? Now, that sounds sadistic, but I promise you someone is saying it in a boardroom somewhere in the world. Why? Because I sit on the board of a bank that cares about women, and I negotiate every day with people who don't care about women. So I can tell you from firsthand that sometimes you need the regulator to be able to stop certain things from going forward. But our regulators think about these things. What about the impact of the regulations we are making? GDPR is a very good regulation, but is it practical and effective? If you think about it, GDPR is sanctioning and punishing people for using data, but what happens to the small developer? If I am Angela over there and I develop this really cool product and a European investor wants to invest in my product and they say, oh, but wait, I have to comply with GDPR, there goes my funding. So is the law becoming an impediment, or is the law presenting solutions? And as we think about the evolutions of the law, Are we really helping the situation or making it more difficult? Now, this is the one that really kills me. Lawyers and reskilling. It doesn't mean we don't have to reskill, but do we understand the differences that these technologies are making? For example, I have 3 favorite examples here, and I will run through them very fast. One, when we went to law school and studied patents, we were told, oh, if anyone makes a cool invention, they get a patent. It's very hard to prove because you must prove the inventive step. Then Google came and began to do stuff on open source. If you think about it, most of the stuff, everyone building a blockchain is saying you can build on my blockchain. And by doing that, they are basically giving away IP for free. What does that mean for the IP lawyer? Are patents going to be in vogue? Blockchain and copyright, music and distributing of royalties. I've talked about that. What about drones and criminal law? You still need actus reus and mens rea to prove a crime was committed. That is, the act itself and the intention to do that. But what if I flew a drone via a certain part of the city and I released powdered anthrax? How would you prove it was me? Are our legal frameworks thinking that far ahead? Or are we still stuck with the penal code as we know it? Now, I already raised the question, who determines what is moral, Facebook versus Twitter? If you have accounts on both, I challenge you to try this out. Go and post the exact same thing on 2 different networks. Try and make it colorful. You know, for once in your life, insult someone out there. Pick a government whom you know will never find you, FYI. With technology, they will always find you. But think about it. What frameworks and mechanisms are you putting in place? Will sandboxes actually work for everything? Sandboxes are the first answer I hear in these conversations everywhere. Oh, let's regulate a sandbox so that we can all learn together and build. But the thing is, there's a geek in a basement or in a bedroom somewhere coding faster than it takes to get a sandbox approved in any institution in this country. Now, in that case, then are we safe? But let's talk about the ethical side of things, risks and accountability. I chose those 2 examples for very specific reasons. Let's look at the images, first of all. Cambridge Analytica. I was in Cape Town last year when the congressional hearings were happening, and I ran out of my meetings to go and sit in the hotel room to watch, because it occurred to me that democracy is no longer what it was. In 2031, the Ugandan election will be determined by crowds on the street. What people tick on that ballot paper, if there will still be a ballot paper, will be determined by how they've been conditioned to think, and that's a function of big data. But how does that fit in Article 1 of Uganda's constitution? Power belongs to the people who exercise it by delegating. You see where I'm going with that. But then the second one is state tweets, which I think that some of you should be aware about. This was an AI experiment that went terribly wrong. They built this chatbot and gave it a Twitter account and said, let it learn, but the internet is a very nice place. So because of the answers that it had been getting from people, all of them insulting stuff like that, by the time it sent out that tweet about feminists saying they should burn in hell, it had been online for, I think, 3 hours and had retweeted and had 230,000 followers. They shut down the experiment. Who is managing the ethical side of regulation? Technologies are good, but they raise very complex questions. We have efficiency, but is that at the expense of things like discrimination, gender-based concerns? We passed a provision in our constitution to say 1/3 of parliament should be women. I want to think that if we go and use data analytics to see how much they are contributing to parliament, we might rethink that. And that, yes, that's me being provocative. But you see where I'm going with this. But who do you sue? That is one of the, I was talking to a friend who lives in the valley, and he said this is one of the hottest questions in the valley. Who do you sue when a driverless car knocks you down? I've been reading research that talks about driverless, ownerless cars. You know, and by the way, before you say the company that sold it, remember the AI was built by someone else. A singularity will come when AIs will talk to themselves. In other words, there is no human intervention between the 2 AIs. The parts were built by someone else. The servicing was done by someone else. And everyone is going to say, it wasn't me. When you're using the algorithms in Jumia, do you think about the ethical side of artificial intelligence? Do you think about the human side to data? Do you humanize these things? But must you, or should the law force you to? The struggle of relevance. A friend of mine who lives in Oxford went to a conference at Oxford 3 weeks ago, and he called me at 4 p.m. and said, my head is about to explode. I said, why? He said, because I've been with the most powerful judges in England, and they're saying they should replace the entire system. They should take out all the lawyers and just let you walk into a room, fill out your complaint, and AI will do the rest until your complaint goes before a judge, who uses a different AI to decide the penalty that someone should suffer or how they should deal with the contract. We will need judges in that era. Can we do without them? You know, the law is very good, and yes, someone is doing the slides for me. I see what you're doing there, but I am almost at the end, I promise. Content and enforcement. Someone from Google yesterday said something powerful. 2 questions that we must all answer. What do you put in the law, and how do you enforce it? Can you predict every scenario? I don't think you can. I think that raises the other question, will we have new models? Some questions are being answered as the tech evolves. Libra answers the question of how do you distribute a data dividend. The same way you remit money on Libra, Facebook should use those very rails to pay us for the data we create. So that question is answering itself because of the technologies that are coming out of there. In other words, are lawyers understanding the tech such that we can think through the legal frameworks properly? Because you cannot do one without the other. You cannot think about how to write that contract if you don't understand what the technology will do. But are the regulators paying attention, or how do we get them to pay attention? But also, that's how you do the payments. But how do you codify data dividends? I've talked about it, that says anyone who's collecting, and I think the Americans here will guide us. The short form is dashboard, and they're saying that if a company collects data from more than 100 million people, then they must disclose which data they collect, how they collect it, how often they collect it, what they use it for, and so on and so forth. That way, that's why I say privacy is no longer a right. Privacy is a product, and we must profit from it. So, OTT in Uganda, was that effective? I'll leave that for you to think about. Ladies and gentlemen, the Binance hack, models are emerging. This is, I believe, my second last slide, if I'm not mistaken. Models are emerging. Binance was hacked, and Binance said, we will pay back everyone who was hacked. Facebook has done the same thing in their white paper with Libra. But Binance, another exchange was hacked maybe last week, and Binance said, we will reject all the crypto coming from that hack. Is self-regulation the way to go? Can we trust human beings to always care about others? Or should we force them to care? You know, these are the questions that tease at my mind when we talk about the future of law. The other question is, what is the role of existing institutions in governance? If we go self-regulatory, or if the algorithms are running faster than the regulator, you know, what will the Electoral Commission do when we can vote on the blockchain? Because think about it. If you can vote on the cell phone, do you need $1 trillion for elections? Don't shoot me, I'm just asking the question. What is a good regime? In other words, that's really all I'm trying to get to. Now they've killed my clicker, so I am struggling to get to the end. But that's why, those who didn't catch it, that was the missing link from the restaurant that has, where you go serve yourself. The robot will not cook that food. There will always be a human element. As I understand it, every geek in this room should have conversations with a lawyer that gets the tech. Yes, that was advertising. But as we build technology, let's think about the human face and the ethical side of these technologies. But you see, we have to facilitate that conversation such that at the end of the day, we are able to build legal frameworks that make sense. I think that a lot of it is going to evolve on its own, but at the end of the day, we must pay attention to the risks, because the advantage with this fourth revolution is this. It has been predicted. We have seen the risks. Not all of them, but we've seen some of them. So the law is on the move. The lawyers in this room, I try to encourage lawyers to come to these conferences, because you have to think about your client of tomorrow. People want to go and be free from owning land and live in cities all over the world, as they were showing us smart cities. I said, okay, so that for me as a lawyer means that people won't be buying land and doing conveyancing anymore. You know, what does that mean for our profession? I am trying to go to that question. If you were paying attention, you could see that some of the images in my slides at the back were trying to put together pieces of this picture. I think it's a beautiful picture, don't you agree? What does the ideal legal framework for the future look like? Because until you understand what that means, you probably won't understand how to advise around it. And I know people like Jumia will say, oh no, we have robots and algorithms tell us what the legal risks are. The thing they won't tell you is the human side. And they won't tell you how the judge might think about that law. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention, and that's all I had for now.